everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore, joined by Kyle Buller. How you doing today, Kyle?
Pretty good, Joe. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. A few days in Philadelphia, and
That was
you
fun
and I just got
hanging.
to link up yesterday. Yeah, it was super fun. Glad we were able to do it. Feels like over 2 years since we've been able to get together.
I think it was May 2019. I think was the last time I saw you out in Colorado.
Yeah, well, it's been quite the run. So good to know we can do this without having to be in person, but hope we get to do more. So a few things before we jump in. Can you talk a little bit about this offering with Jerry Brown, the historian?
Yeah, we have a live course coming up with Dr. Jerry Brown. That's going to kick off Tuesday, October 26th. And that's going to be at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Pacific. And what is it, 5 p.m. Like UK time. Is that right? GMT.
Just say the Eastern version and let other people.
Oh no, that's 7 p.m. I think 2 p.m. Yeah. So 2 p.m. Eastern time. That's what I'm going with since I'm East Coast based.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a 4-week live course. There's 6 pre-recorded modules that Dr. Jerry Brown put together, and then we're gonna meet online on Zoom for 4 weeks to go into the material deeper. So it's called Psychedelics, Past, Present, and Future. So digging into the past, talking about what has been going on in the present moment with research and just the psychedelic renaissance in general, and then predicting what's going on in the future. So talking about emerging careers and possibilities. Should be super fun. I'm really excited about it. I'll be on with the live classes. So if you want to hang out, you can do that. And then if you want to get a little preview of it too, you can go to psychedeliceducationcenter.com, go down to the psychedelic past, present, and future page there. And there should be a nice little free preview on there as well. So you can check that out. And kind of get a feel for what that is. And we will be releasing a podcast and a blog article with Jerry, I think next week too, depending on when you are listening to this. It might be this week if you're listening to it.
Cool. And people can find more info about that at psychedeliceducationcenter.com or psychedelicstoday.com. And stay tuned on our socials. You'll find some good stuff there.
And it's CE approved as well. So if you're looking for that, you can get some CE credits.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, get some history and CE at the same go. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And then next up, January 6th, we've got Navigating Psychedelics back again. So we're taking a few months off of teaching it, October, November, December, from new cohorts. We're still actively working through a couple courses, so it's awesome. You all probably know the score here, but it's an 8-week. Actually, Kyle, is there going to be a change?
Yeah, we just added another week in there, so it'll be 9 weeks total, and that kicks off on January 6th, that Thursday, and the same times, 2 p.m. Eastern, and then we have our 7 p.m. Eastern as well.
Right, awesome. So that is also CE approved, 12 hours of CE across 9 weeks. And you have a foundation from which to understand how you might want to proceed through your psychedelic career. We're going to have some more interesting offerings coming up and getting announced sooner than later. So a great way to start would be to jump into our class. And there's all sorts of education out there. Ours gives you a transpersonal framework and plenty of other things, a somatic and trauma-informed framework. We include harm reduction and how to stay safe. Both legally and, in your body, drug interactions and all that kind of fun stuff, rules of thumb, all sorts of great things that you should probably know if you're exploring this space. I think anybody from a freshman at a university or even a junior, senior at a high school would be well served taking this. And then all the way up to doctors that have been active for decades. So we've had any kind of person join us, from coach to doctor to therapist, psychologist, musician, and activist. So tons and tons of folks from around the world. I think we've probably taught people from over 20 countries at this point, though I've not been tracking, but it's really cool. Yeah, so stay tuned, everybody. Again, January 6th, that kicks off, psychedelicEducationCenter.com if you want to learn more. All right, now let's dig in. So maybe let's start with Seattle. So
Cool. Yeah, big
actually,
win.
yeah, totally. I had a cool phone call with some of the Seattle activists recently, and I didn't realize it was so far along. But Tatiana Luz Quintana, I think, was on that podcast. What was it? Entheos Society of Washington or something from a while back. And it was a whole mess of people given a platform. So it's really cool. And Tatiana looks like she's really made a big dent here. So really excited to see how this happens. And what I've noticed is that this is Decriminalize Nature Seattle. And those of you who've been listening for a while probably listened to our show about Decriminalize Nature. We overgeneralize a little bit. There are plenty of local organizations that aren't affiliated with that more national organization with Carlos and Larry. So Seattle is independent. They used to be more closely aligned, but they decided to split. So great work. But it looks like home cultivation of cannabis is still illegal in Washington state. But I guess this is more about the municipality. This article is Marijuana Moment, written by Ben Adlin. Seattle becomes largest U.S. city to decriminalize psychedelics. It's pretty awesome. Seattle is pretty big.
I was surprised too. It was 9-0 vote. So, I mean, that seems pretty big that nobody voted against it.
And this is similar to Denver. It's now Seattle's lowest enforcement priority. And I was actually told recently it's damn near impossible to get arrested for drugs in Seattle. Anyway.
Aren't they working on something similar to Portland as well?
I've heard rumors. Yeah. So Oregon, was it Oregon or just Portland, Kyle, where it was like all drug decrim?
I think that was all of Oregon. I think that was on the statewide ballots.
Cool. Yeah. So, yeah, like that's hopefully coming soon. And I wouldn't be surprised if or Washington starts to mimic the Oregon 109 measure to start doing, a really similar thing. Would really help their economy, would help mental health. Washington is kind of notoriously depression and suicidality seem to be really closely linked in our cultural American imagination. And it's about bad weather. It's about dark, rainy winters and seasons, and it's get a lot of rain. Colorado having 300 days of sunshine a year, and Washington probably being more like 300 days of cloudy, rainy stuff. So the state could use it, the city could use it. So let's hope. Just a few days in cloudy Pennsylvania, and I'm feeling off.
Oh man, I know. I'm feeling it right now. It's been cloudy for the past 2 days. I'm like tired, and it's weird how it just affects your energy so much.
Right. It's kind of nice when I'm traveling. I don't consume as much coffee, so usually I would just be charging at really high speed, but I've been able to slow it down a bit. It looks like that's probably all I want to share on Seattle. Was there anything else that really stood out for you?
No, just wanted to, highlight that for those that might not be closely following things. So that was some big news and updates in the decrim and psychedelic world that, Seattle has voted to decriminalize plants. So, huge win.
Did it seem like mostly plant-based psychedelics?
That's what it seemed like. So they decriminalized non-commercial activity around a wide range of psychedelic substances, including the cultivation and sharing of psilocybin, ayahuasca, ibogaine, and then also non-peyote-derived mescaline.
Cool. Right on. So, in an interesting turn of events in Santa Cruz, the town of California overturns, I'm reading this from bazinga.com, Santa Cruz overturns decriminalization of peyote and similar plants to protect them per indigenous groups' requests. So this is going to be an interesting battle. We've seen an interesting battle between decriminalized nature and various indigenous groups, including IPCI, Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative, I think it's called. Indigenous Peyote, yeah, that's it. And then the National Council of Native American Churches, NCNAC. Looks like both of these groups want to push back against this legislation because it could impact, well, there's a few reasons. It could impact the amount available domestically in state for their members of the church, who it's their sacrament, and it has been for lifetimes or generations. So this is something I usually get into in class. We were never able to pull this podcast off, but I had a really great conversation with the person who was put in charge of IPCI. I totally forget her name, but really interesting conversation discussing how I think they represent 50 different tribal interest groups. And they all vote on what the organization does around peyote conservation. And the opinions are super diverse everywhere, everything from it's only appropriate to consume in religious ceremonies for the NAC, earth grown, non-greenhouse grown, so outdoor grown, natural peyote. And all the way to the other end where people want to actually build super advanced greenhouses, grow as many as you can, and plant them all over as well, so that the greenhouse grow offsets consumption of naturally sourced stuff. So it's a really interesting conversation, and it becomes really messy. The way you and I or Westerners might want to think of it is that there's what's the difference? It's just peyote with an active compound in it, but there's a whole lineage to the earth. A number of Native American groups believe that peyote is their ancestor and that their ancestors live inside the peyote. That's how they commune with their ancestors. And it goes so far as some of the tribal interest groups wanting to get funding to fly overseas to plead with growers in Southeast Asia to stop growing and exporting this. I don't know. I think I talked to you about this a little bit, but there's a gentleman in Canada, really well known. I forget his name offhand. Big time cannabis activist, now psychedelic activist. He's actually growing and selling peyote in store legally in Vancouver. And
oh wow,
there's a lot of action and name calling on Twitter a while ago. Seemed a little inappropriate.
Yeah,
it seemed really kind of gross in my mind, but I'm not a Native American church person, nor am I the kind of person that's going to like actively attack somebody on Twitter, but it just looked a little crazy. And eventually the attacker was able to say, all right, I'm going to have Sander Ironrope, I think his name was. I think we saw him present at Horizons a few years back, Kyle. This person's going to be contacted by Sander Ironrope to discuss how growing peyote in a greenhouse is kind of a misstep on Native American rights, which is pretty interesting. I don't know enough to really comment a lot on this because, in my mind, greenhouse grown takes away from the demand on, outdoor grown. But if there's a religious layer on top of this that's hard for us to interpret, then perhaps it's time to back down. And Native American groups have suffered plenty. Do we really need to get high on peyote in order to, do our own thing, or are there other substances that would do just fine? I've actually not seen a good subjective study yet comparing San Pedro and mescaline or peyote. Have you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's
Mm,
not much like peyote research in general out there, right?
mm,
Or at least
mm.
within universities and whatnot. So that would be a really interesting study to take on. Or yeah, even just mescaline in general versus like peyote. But yeah, that was the one thing that I was a little bummed about reading through that they kind of recriminalized. I guess that's the words that they were using. For all mescaline containing cacti to San Pedro as well. And that's a little disappointing, right? Because that's typically, still sold as a lawn ornament. There's probably that, religious kind of aspect to San Pedro, but mostly, probably in South America.
Mm.
Not so much here. And yeah, I mean, it would have been nice that, maybe they would have kept that in there and really kind of focused on just the peyote part. But yeah, it looks like they recriminalized all mescaline containing cacti.
Mm. I've reading through both of these. This Bazinga article looks like it was populated by some of the folks at Decriminalize, and same with Marijuana Moment. So I'd want to actually see some documents coming straight from the city, or sources that are a little less close to the topic. Um, so, like, what was the actual resolution? I'm sure we could find it. So, I think we should probably cover this again next week and add some more details in. Because is that true? It seems a little goofy that they would have made a mistake like that.
Right.
At the municipal level, making San Pedro illegal seems like it's an added expense on the city. Like, it wasn't illegal before. Like, who informed this? Yeah, and let's see. Like, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not. So we'll report back more hopefully next week, folks. Um, yeah, and it's tough to see this change rolled back, but it's also important to understand that uh, the narrative's being shaped a little bit around a lot of these things, and we should just see really clearly what is the actual law. What was the intent? Why did they do it? Does it make sense for a pretty progressive town in California to respect the wishes of Native Americans? Yeah. So, um, or activists in California. I don't know. I think respecting the wishes of the Native American group makes more sense, but
Yeah.
I don't think the Native American group wanted San Pedro in there. San Pedro seems like the thing that can keep people from eating peyote.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's probably enough on that one. Unless there's anything interesting on Santa Cruz you wanted to get into.
Nope. I think that's about it.
Cool. Then next up, this interesting article. A friend actually tipped me off to this morning. And this is an interesting psychedelic thing, and we'll get into why it's psychedelic in a moment. But title of the article, this is from a website called therecord.media. Title of the article here is Dark Web Marketplace, White House Market Shuts Down. I don't know. Have we talked much about dark web marketplaces, Kyle, on the show?
I think like hinting here and there towards it, but not so much.
Um, so I think this is a really substantial marketplace. It was mostly active in Europe. It's still not totally shut down yet. They only accepted Monero, and essentially you figure out how to navigate the Tor thing, the browser, and then figure out how to get to these markets. And then you can buy plenty of interesting illegal things. And you are breaking the law by doing it. But a lot of people are breaking the law to buy all sorts of things, right? So there's a lot of websites in this space that have actually what's called exit scammed. So they'll just be a really active, really quality marketplace for years. And at a certain point, they just shut down shop and run away with a whole bunch of cryptocurrency and don't give people what they thought they paid for. So it's a really kind of scammy situation. It's happened a lot. Yeah, I know a few people that lost a little bit of money, like somewhere between like $200 to $500 in Bitcoin back then. Who knows what it's worth now? So it's happened. I know people that have been impacted by it, and what's different here is that they announced that they met their goals and that
I
they
wonder
were
what
going
that
to close in two
was.
years. What was that?
I wonder what their goals were.
It's interesting, right? Yeah, like they were
Yeah.
doing Monero only, so that's like a super duper privacy oriented thing. You had to do a lot of encryption stuff. Like I think between each page, you had to do a fair amount of like encryption, decryption stuff using tools like GPG. Um, and like Cleopatra is a couple. There's a few others. But yeah, they said, thanks everybody for your business, trust, support, and of course for placing decent amounts of money in our pockets. We may come back sometime in the future with a different project, or we may not. Meanwhile, be on the lookout for phishing or copycats. If it's not signed by us, it's not us. So people can probably cash out. There's vendors that need to like off ramp out of the platform. And yeah, if you kept money on there, you can probably pull it right out. So yeah, what's interesting here is that so it's an anonymous person, but they've used this signature. And in encryption, there's this idea of a signature that you can actually verify it's the right individual that wrote the message. Um, what is it called? PKI, public key encryption, or
Hmm.
I think that's it. Public key infrastructure, PK. There's a whole like evolution on encryption that happened a few decades back. It really allowed for all of this to play out the way it is now. Yeah, so the site operators did sign this message, and it's pretty well confirmed that it's them. Yeah, White House launched in October 2019. You could only get on there by the Tor network, and had nearly 900,000 registered users, over 3,000 vendors, and over 47,000 listings.
Wow.
It's pretty incredible, right? Like, if that was all drugs, that would be pretty interesting. And we in the psychedelic space, there's a handful of ways to obtain drugs, right? You could be part of a clinical trial. You could buy it from a friend. You could buy it from just a regular drug dealer. You could buy it from dark web. I don't know. You could rob a lab or something, or have a chemist friend that makes it. So the dark web really democratized access because it took a computer and an internet connection, and almost anybody then was able to buy drugs and have it mailed home, which is quite revolutionary. Nobody needed to expose their identity other than really the purchaser. And that was typically only done to validated and confirmed vendors. So these markets operated kind of like eBay, where you could see how many successful transactions they had, see all the reviews, you could see the reviews on the products. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think just from a harm reduction standpoint too, like I remember some friends and whatnot were on the Silk Road early on, and just kind of seeing also like the reviews on there about like purity reports, if there was any sort of adulterants that were tested within there, like people being able to leave those types of reviews, and how I guess like comforting would that be, knowing that there's being able to have that review system within a marketplace like that feels huge. I mean, obviously you'd still probably want to test your substance just to be on the safe side, but I mean, I guess just having a lot of that peer validation, and reviews there is super, super helpful, just from a harm reduction standpoint, knowing what you're getting, right, versus not knowing what you're getting. We talk about this all the time. Like, even though the person that you might get it from is always always the good stuff, or whatnot, like there's a good chance that they didn't test whatever they're selling, or giving you, right? And you have no idea what you're getting, especially when you're dealing with more kind of synthetic substances, versus mushrooms or cannabis and whatnot. But again, like I think we were talking about last week in class, like, yeah, we've definitely heard reports of people like soaking mushrooms and other things. And I'm sure it doesn't happen often, but people do some strange things from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's no way you can look at a powder and identify it. That's what an analytical chemist does, or like some of this high end equipment does, can help you understand what it is. And your eyeballs don't have that kind of sophistication, or when it comes to identifying powders, right? So, um, yeah, I had a really interesting conversation recently about MDMA with somebody, and just like the conversation around colors and what the crystals looked like and all this stuff. I'm like, that's a little goofy. I don't know. I don't think that's really the way we should be talking about this.
Right.
Test kits are really important, and it's only really scratching the surface of what we should do um, to keep people safe. Yeah, um, yeah. So dark net markets really helped reduce harm. People could share information. You could say, okay, like these 2 or 3 vendor or buyers confirmed that their marquee reagent test like returned these things. So like, okay, that informs my decision. Let's go forward. Um, yeah, and not to mention just democratizing access. Like how many people
Yeah.
have come to us saying, I can't find drugs. I don't know what to do. I'm like, well, sorry, bud. Try Google. It's like my new answer. Like because I'm not even going to direct them really to dark markets or listings or anything.
Now Google knows.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Google. But yeah, it's really interesting, right? Like there's something here, and it's a lot of these sites are getting shut down. A lot of vendors are getting popped. So it's like, how can you be really, really secure? Yes, at the end of this article here on the record.media, it says Dream Market, which is super famous, exit scammed, meaning they kind of like said, no, we're out, technical support issues. So they do that for like a day, and then they can get all their Bitcoins out and then take off. Um, the Empire market shut down. And after US and European authorities took down the Valhalla and Wall Street market earlier this year, yeah, there's been a lot of coordinated international efforts to shut these things down. So in Europe, I think they're able to like kind of reverse engineer things a little bit
Mm.
through the postal service. I don't really know about in the States. I do know that in the U.S., USPS, the Postal Service, requires a warrant to actually search your mail. I don't know if that's accurate or the same in Europe. So that's why a lot of these vendors are using USPS instead of something like UPS or FedEx or DHL or something.
Mm.
So, this is how a lot of people are getting drugs. It might not be them operating on these websites, but it could be a friend of theirs or their dealers doing it this way. It's a good way to keep criminals safe or drug dealers safe. So, food for thought. Yeah, it just is a helpful step in the direction of democratizing access. You know, how many PhDs do you need to figure out the dark web? For some people, you think multiple, but others, middle school person could probably sort it out. Um, it's pretty techy, so it's not like using your iPhone. You've got to like be a little bit more sophisticated. But it's something to keep an eye on. This is not going away.
No, I doubt it. I'm sure
Yeah.
it's just going to keep popping up. As much as the market's shut down, new ones pop up, right?
Uh-huh. It's cheaper than setting up your new territory in New York somewhere. Like this is your block in Brooklyn or something. Like it's a very different situation than that because it's the internet. What you're doing is creating an attractive place for vendors and buyers to come. Hopefully, that feels safe, has enough product diversity. Um, you know, so there's a lot there. Um, yeah. So yeah, the dark markets are super interesting to me. I've wanted to develop some sort of educational thing on this, but I don't really think it's appropriate for me to do that. And there's plenty of things on YouTube about how to do it. Primary warning: just be very careful and go really slow. And only put into Bitcoin and crypto into this what you can afford to lose. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to just lose money here, so you got to be really careful. Yeah. I don't know. Have you had any interesting stories from dark markets with some of your friends or people you know?
No, not so much. I mean, I had some that were, just interested in it. I do kick myself in the ass because, this was back in 2010 and they
Mm.
were trying to tell me to buy Bitcoin. And, that was like around $7 or $12 at that point. And they're like, yeah, just buy some Bitcoin. You can go on these marketplaces and do X, Y, and Z. And, it seemed really interesting, really cool. I just started college, so I was kind of broke and wasn't thinking about, yeah, I'll put $100 in some sort of weird digital currency and try to do all this stuff. I was really kind of focused on, this new chapter in my life. But I always, think back and be like, damn it, if I had X amount of Bitcoin, damn, where would I be at when it was only like $7?
We wouldn't be here doing this project, Kyle, if you were rich. um,
But no, I didn't have too much exposure to it. Like I've just a little bit here and there, never really dabbled. But I do find it just interesting. A lot of the friends that were really involved with it was, I find it really interesting to just understand there's a different part of the internet that exists
mhm.
that most people don't know anything about. And that was probably the most fascinating aspect of that, was just kind of learning about that and learning like what's outside the normal scope of what we see the internet. And I mean,
Yeah.
especially now when we think about the internet, and I don't know if that's that definition of like Web 2.0, but just like very app based, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
like you're just getting all your stuff on Facebook and Google and this and that. And then, what about what's existing on the outside of the structures that have been created for us to play around in? It's still there to some degree, but yeah, I mean, trying to Google search some things, there's obviously people maximize their SEO and pay. So, there's a lot of stuff that's definitely on the internet that you just can't find because it doesn't, show up in certain ways. So, that was, I think, probably some of the most interesting things that I was pulling from back then. Just, the friends just kind of showing me what exists out there. And it blew my mind. I was just like, what the hell? Like this exists? Like, this is so fascinating. And it wasn't just like drug stuff too, right? I mean, the things that existed on there were just kind of, interesting, like counterfeit coupons that you could go and get free gift cards. Just
Right.
wild stuff.
um, right. There's so many interesting things and new compounds that you could see on there. You can actually learn, right? Like a little bit, kind of like Earwid. You're like, oh, what is this molecule in the psychedelic category? And you can actually see kind of lightweight experience reports in the review section. I think that's really, really interesting. I don't think I had. I don't think we talked about this too much, but Ross Ulrich, the gentleman that created the Silk Road, seemed like a lifetime or 2 life sentences for making a website.
Yeah.
Never really convicted of any of the other things that were alleged against him, as far as I can tell. And he's doing time. He's doing a lot of time. And there's not too many people interested in trying to help him get out. There's a whole like hashtag free Ross thing on Twitter. There's, I often retweet a lot of their material. It's just like, this guy went to jail pretty young, and he worked for the cause of freedom. And it's a tough deal. It's a raw deal to be treated that way. So I'd suggest people check out that story, read some books about Ross Ulrich.
It's probably some documentaries and stuff on that story too, right?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's just a really interesting scenario. Like, why would federal courts be so afraid of people, doing this with the internet? Is it just such a threat to their control, kind of domination that they had to? Like, it certainly is a democratic thing. Like, anybody with a chemist friend that they can convince to do this now has pretty lucrative business that could impact like normal drug distribution channels. Um,
Well, that, and I can imagine all the other illegal things that are happening on there too, like, weapon sales and, I've heard some bizarre stuff like, hiring hitmen and X, Y, and Z. So it does seem like a breeding ground for criminal activity, right? And being somewhat protected by that Tor network and whatnot. But, I don't know. Like I said, like I haven't dug too much into it. It wasn't really my thing back
mm,
then, or digging into the whole dark web thing. Just it was interesting, but I never really went down the well there to look more into it.
right. Um, right. It's an interesting deal. Like, it isn't just drugs. Yeah. There's plenty of other
Yeah, it's
stuff
just
for
like a
sale there.
fraction. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
Um, but that's, uh, people are always going to find a way. I remember in my undergrad studying black markets in Soviet Russia, and it was really interesting. Like, how did the Western music get in? How, like, what kinds of items were actually sold on these like dark or gray markets in Russia? There's all sorts of interesting stuff. Lots of Western products, and what does that mean? Like, it means that the state that they thought was totalitarian, like a total state, wasn't really that way. Um, and almost everybody was involved in gray or black market activity in Soviet Russia because they kind of had to be, to meet their essential needs.
mm.
Um, yeah. So black markets are never going away. Prohibition never really works. People are creative enough to always work around it. And prohibition seems to incentivize people so that, the stricter the rules, the higher value the thing is going to be. So there's always going to be people breaking laws to smuggle and traffic and create when those things are prohibited. Um, I'm thinking I just rewatched the Hamilton Morris Pharmacopoeia episode with uh, methaqualone. I think that might be
Hmm.
the chemical name. Quaaludes, mandrax in South Africa, and they would actually. So this whole thing is a fascinating episode. If you haven't seen this one or don't remember it, but they would actually poach for abalone, a some sort of shellfish or bivalve in the ocean, super duper protected, and then they actually sell it to Chinese mafia. It's a little small South African mafia is trading these things to Chinese, like mafia connections, and then producing, getting in exchange the ingredients required to make mandrax or quaaludes.
Hmm.
And that only works because it's illegal to hunt abalone and there. And these drugs are illegal. So it's like a really interesting high value trade they made. Um, so yeah, you don't even really need cash in these situations, in the same way you do if you want to buy food or something. Trades are just fine. So it's going to be an interesting scene, like to see what happens next with prohibition. I hope it starts to ease, and I'm seeing signs of that. Right, like
I mean, just looking at like all these cities and town ordinances passing decriminalization. I mean, it's one step, right? Just even thinking about Oregon decriminalizing substances. I mean, again, I always think back like a few years ago, like could we see this happen anytime soon? And I guess yeah, when I got started on this, it was really just like really wishing on like FDA approval. I mean, I wasn't even thinking that decriminalizing some plant medicines and psychedelics was even a possibility anytime soon. Um,
right,
I remember going to an event called like envisioning a post-prohibition world. I think it was a
Mm.
symposia event. Yeah, that sounds about right. And just thinking like, when could that even happen?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Didn't seem too like it would happen too soon, but it's been really exciting seeing things get decriminalized. And what happens when that starts to happen more and more? Like, it brings up an interesting question around these marketplaces. Like, could marketplaces actually function then? I guess the sale of it would still be illegal, but what interesting things could start to pop up if this starts to become nationwide thing that starts to happen. More and more places decriminalize it, maybe become statewide, social sharing online somehow.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's super interesting. Yeah. End of prohibition, right? Like, I think we need a few high profile cases and some people to get loud, right? Like, there was that person that went to prison recently, I think for 20 to life for a single gram cannabis joint. And how many people are going away for 10 to 30 years for methamphetamine? It's really tough. Ketamine is probably coming. A lot there.
Well, you just kind of bringing up like high profile people, that just reminded me recently. I didn't read the entire article, but I was seeing it just shared around a whole bunch. But Will Smith, for example, coming out about his ayahuasca experience. The more and more this kind of starts to enter into the mainstream, and more high profile people start to get involved in this and start to share their story, how does that start to really change the cultural narrative? And can it start to change that cultural narrative when more kind of high profile people get behind it and show that, hey, maybe it's not such a bad thing, and especially when they're finding healing or some sort of transformation within their experience. Did you happen to read that article about Will Smith?
Unfortunately, no. See if we can get him on. Tell him I'm a huge fan for a lot of reasons.
Anybody's got connections with him.
Yeah, please. I did see the headlines though. I think I saw it when I was on my way to record with Hamilton Morris the other day. Oh, maybe that's something else we can chat about. I just got the opportunity to record with Hamilton Morris. I tweeted about it, and I imagine the episode will be out in a couple weeks. I think I need to get him to give a thumbs up on it first, and then we're good to rock. Really interesting character. Just glad I finally was able to record. We had a good time. We touched on the sensitive topics that you might be aware of, and yeah. But anyway, back to prohibition. Hamilton's also quite anti-prohibition. I think people should be able to do whatever they want, and the government should be here to help them stay safe. That's one or two things he mentioned. But yeah, like, if you read Carl Hart, you see that there's plenty of high-profile cases, but it's largely people of color, which doesn't really get the attention of the mainstream media in the way that, white Harvard professor gets arrested because people think he might have blow on him, cocaine. Sorry, and what do you do? How do we get there? I think we need to find those really strategic, high-profile cases, and say, hey, like, these are ridiculous. Like, police are overreaching. Like, this stuff is not working great. But I know people like Transform Drug Policy are working on this. Drug Policy Alliance has been on this for ages as well. So these people have a strategy, and I think it's around educating politicians, educating people, so that they understand more about drugs, more about, what's dangerous, actually. Yeah. So I think it's coming. From politicians I've spoken with, they all relatively understand it's just it's a crapshoot. I think there's going to be some interesting holy rollers fighting it, but go ahead.
And I think when you start to see like more conservative institutions get involved and become curious, That starts to change the narrative as well. I just came across another article pretty recently about the VA, kind of closely paying attention to a lot of the research. It's definitely a very conservative institution. And I know they've probably been interested in it. I've definitely heard some things here and there about them obviously paying attention, but to see an article headline like that, that they're closely following it. It seems like there's interest developing there more and more. And, what happens when an institution like that gets on board behind psychedelics for healing PTSD, right? How is that really going to shift things?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it's going to be big. They've got very deep pockets and they've got a lot of people to serve. It's interesting because it's not a system that's affiliated with normal health insurance companies, right? Like Blue Cross Blue Shield, I don't believe has anything to do with the VA healthcare system. So the VA is probably like similar in some senses to Kaiser Permanente, where the whole system is optimized for better outcomes. And it's because they have an interest in all of it. Cradle to grave kind of thing, right? So I think the VA could do some really interesting things as a result. Yeah. So, yeah, where do we want to go from here, Kyle?
Yeah. Well, how was, I guess, anything interesting from Hamilton that you could maybe tease out a little bit more? I would love to hear a little bit about that. I'm sure some of the listeners maybe want a little tease.
Well, he's very productive now in his chemistry work. I actually got to meet his season 3, like one of the season 3 producer researchers. Really interesting character. What else? They're on their final printing of the Toad book, meaning you and I should probably buy a copy before it's gone. But
Are they doing like a limited run?
They've done 5 different printings.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's the whole PDF's available online. They've just cleaned it up and updated a lot of the synthesis stuff in the end. Yeah, so essentially they've reprinted the oldest kind of manual around the Sonoran Desert Toad. What was the pseudonym? Albert Most.
Sounds right.
Yeah, and then added some chemistry stuff to the end. They've been able to raise a ton of money and donate it all to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, I think, where they're looking at either Alzheimer's or Parkinson's research.
With 5-MeO?
No, just generally. It's too mainstream of an organization, probably, to look at 5. Though they did want that. It's probably not the right move. Yeah, so I think that's really cool. What else? It's just interesting. There's a lot of interesting banter and like questions and answers around different things. At one point, it said, "You might know this." It's like, uh-oh. Something that Hamilton might not know. I was like, well, sorry to disappoint you. But I did have some okay data. We were aware of a number of similar controversies, and that was cool. Things that we aren't allowed to talk about on the show, really. So that was helpful. Yeah. And for those who aren't aware, it's pretty easy to get sued. So we try to do our whole thing strategically here. There's a lot of reasons why we don't talk about a lot of things. And sometimes they're good reasons, sometimes they're probably weak, but we try our best. Yeah. Hamilton. It was in a beautiful school, the University of Sciences in Philadelphia. It's somewhat in the shadow of UPenn, an Ivy League institution here. I kept saying the name University of Sciences, and everybody kind of was making fun of me. It sounds really made up. But I even saw billboards in New Jersey for it yesterday.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm told it's the oldest school of pharmacy.
Oh, interesting. I mean, when I first came across that name, I thought the same thing. I was like, is that just made up university? That's funny.
It'd be pretty funny.
Saying that.
Apparently Norm Macdonald has some jokes about it. We get into it a little bit. at the beginning of the interview. R.I.P. Um, yeah, and we didn't get to go into the lab. All the doors were locked, but we were in a really cool, like, little common space in the university campus. So
Yeah, it's just super cool to finally be able to meet up with him and probably just record, hang out, get to know him a bit more.
I I talked to him a little bit about a project I had in mind, which was essentially finding chemists in a place like Portugal, for instance, to synthesize various compounds, videotape the whole process, and like really teach people the process of synthesis of various things or extractions of various things, and have a whole library of videos up on one of these dark markets. So $4 or $5, you then have like a really great video instruction set on manufacture of all these things. So what was his line? Kind of what I did. And because like at the end of every show, for those who don't know, well, not every show, but a lot of them, Hamilton would actually run down the formula, the synthesis formula, and how you would actually manufacture things.
Right.
Do you remember
And
that part?
like what? Yeah, and wasn't there something that like Vice was a little worried about that, about like portraying some of that, like
Are you going to
maybe,
get sued? Like, are you
yeah,
breaking the law by putting this on TV? It's a really fair question. And maybe not breaking the law, but could an agency come after you?
yeah, or just like encouraging and showing people how to do that. But wasn't it from like Hamilton's perspective? It almost felt like a harm reduction safety thing. Um, I could be wrong. I feel like I heard this in an interview or
Well, we
just somewhere.
disempower cartels. We disempower large distribution networks by making it more democratic. And if we care about cartel violence, if we care about American drug habit fueling violence and death in Mexico via potentiated cartels with lots of cash, then anything we can do to take power away from them, like publish secrets, publish methods, is good. That's one of the
Yeah.
biggest reasons why I'm not for prohibition. What do we have? Over 100,000 deaths in Mexico related to the drug war in recent past. Is that worth like your son not smoking pot or like not ever trying cocaine? 100,000 deaths. It's only 1/7 the official figure around COVID deaths in the U.S. So I don't know. It's hard to dealing with
Probably a lot
numbers
more
over
deaths
100
that
are hard
probably
for me.
go unnoticed too, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. I wish I had better figures on like Mexican drug violence as it relates to like cartels and trafficking to the states, but don't have those on hand. But a book, Narconomics, does a really good job on this. Probably talked about it on the show a bunch. They the authors, or maybe single author, take an economist's approach to what are these organizations, how does their finances and businesses work, and what would be some more efficient ways to actually address this problem. What we're doing only makes them stronger and makes them more money currently. So we're making cartels stronger through our tax dollars. Do you remember the Obama Fast and Furious fiasco?
Vaguely, not much.
Essentially, they wanted to like feed cartels guns that were tracked
Yeah, this is
in
going back a
exchange for
little bit.
something to get better intel or something along these lines. But folks should look that up. Fast and Furious Obama. It's like a classic DEA ATF blunder. Um, yeah, and cartels got away with it, and they got away with a lot of guns, and
Jeez.
we got away with came away with almost nothing. Black eye and looking like an idiot. Your tax dollars hard at work. I don't know. I just don't think prohibition has ever worked. I think it's unethical. It's a great way to make sure people are scared and not thinking clearly about issues. So what if we encouraged and used taxpayer dollars to help people think clearly about this stuff? Probably go a long way. Get them all education on, oh, okay, you're gonna do this drug this weekend. Cool. Like take this 2-3 hour class at least, please, before you do that. Maybe that's overstepping. Like I don't really want the government to like have any real restrictions there, but if we can reduce harm, we should. Prohibition and extra rules aren't really that great. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody the other day said decriminalization over everything to me, and I was like, I don't think so. And we've chatted about this a lot, right? Like,
Yeah.
decrim doesn't mean safe supply. Safe supply is a function of safe manufacture, ecological, process, not just dumping everything in the drain. Testing, like some sort of purity standards, concentration standards, less contaminants.
Well, even in legal markets, I was listening to this this podcast on the whole Delta 8 thing, and just talking about the contamination that happened. No, well, no, somebody
cool.
somebody gave me some, and then I listened to this podcast, and I was like, maybe I should figure out where that came from. Yeah, because what was that podcast? I'm spacing on it right now. Joe Dulce's Weed.
Oh man, Dolce, Dolce, right?
Yeah,
I forget. He's super cool though.
Sorry, Joe.
But okay, he did an episode on Delta 8. It's kind of like early CBD if you think about it. It's like this really kind of super high quality products and then pretty terrible products on the market. Sometimes synthetically manufactured, sometimes from plants, right?
Yeah, and that's what they were talking about, and just like the contaminants that are left over and lab testing, and how even it is legal. There's also a lot of shitty products out there, and then what type of effects does that have on people? So that kind of got me thinking a little bit more about it. But I'm sure that even probably happens in the cannabis space too, right? Like not just like this weird Delta. And I mean, it was interesting because some of the manufacturers of Delta 8 or chemists around trying to synthesize some of it they were even saying like they didn't really take too much of it. Like they'd really prefer, just regular THC or whatnot. Brave New Weed, that's what it's called.
Love it. It's such a good name.
Yeah. So
yeah, Delta 8's a really interesting thing, and it's a great example of a somewhat unregulated market or a wildly unregulated market. It's and we see this even with kratom, right? You have to sometimes label it not for human consumption, and then you can sell it, right? Like that's kind of a weird workaround. Like prohibition makes it so that we can't have that. In some states, it's probably going to be illegal. I think Colorado was briefly illegal or something. It's scary, and people are going to do what they want to do regardless of legal status. You might stop some people, but do you really want to spend your resources putting them in jail or fining them or hurting their family possibly for generations? Think about that. And having the government in the mix, I see why people want decrim, but I just disagree. It's not the complete answer. It's a baby step in the right direction, really.
I was going to say, definitely a baby step.
Yeah, like it's in the right direction. Absolutely. I don't wholeheartedly disagree with it. I just wholeheartedly disagree it's the answer, quote unquote, to solving this whole problem of reducing deaths, making people happier and healthier. And
I think I was really
go ahead.
I think I was really kind of on the decrim side before starting this. And I know like chatting to different people and you, and then thinking about legalization, because I was really worried, I guess, about like commodifying it and, just what that comes with. But then, after, talking to you and a lot of other people through this podcast, I've kind of shifted my views around it. Right. And so, to one degree, really starting off with that, a lot of these plants and substances feel sacred, and do you commodify it, do you bring it into the legal market, and then just like have these like products that are all like flashy and etc. But versus like just really honoring the plant or the substance and kind of keeping, I guess, that sacredness to it. And I think a lot of people that come from that decrim, especially decrim nature, I think feel that they want that. instead of exploiting the medicine. Maybe it does feel like we're exploiting it a little bit in like a legal market when we start to commercialize it a bit more. But again, right, then it comes back to, for me with some of this stuff, it's like, yeah, safe supply, access, etc.
Yeah.
Like, if we're talking about LSD, like I would definitely love to get my LSD from, a pharmacist or, somewhere where it's like, you're getting it pure versus, the amateur chemist in his basement that's just allowed to synthesize it because, it's decriminalized and he's, allowed to, get the precursor and then not knowing, hey, did he mess up some steps here? Is this what else is in here? Does he know what he's doing? I'd rather get it from a regulated source at that point. But mushrooms or plants, like, yeah, I get down with, yeah, I mean, I should be able to grow that shit in my garden, like tomatoes and other plants. If I want to do that, why not?
Right. And let's, a friend made a good point a long time ago. Is it really legal to grow cannabis if you can only grow 6 plants?
No.
Right. Like, I think they did that to help impact market dynamics. And this is another thing. Like, yes, it's legal, but it's, the laws weren't done great. Like, it's not a really great system. So it allows for underground and gray market vendors to continue, which is fine, right? Like, some people need that. But really, if everybody was able to grow as much as they wanted, prices would continue to drop. Hopefully quality would continue to slowly improve overall, but people could make their own medicine and not need to work so much to afford it, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe medicine is not the right word. Just drugs. You want to just get stoned. It's fine. Like, so, and some people suggest that raw cannabis juiced is an incredible anti-cancer agent. I don't know much about it. I would love to dig into that more. But if you only have 6 plants, you can't really make enough juice to really make a difference. So, and what's interesting is as long as you don't heat it, you shouldn't really get too high from it.
Yeah, no, because you're not decarbing the THC, right?
Right. THC-A to THC or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to a talk a long time ago, so it's been ages. So
yeah,
rusty on the logic there.
And then when you decarb it, you break down that acid, then it turns into THC, which is more psychoactive.
Right. So even if we get to legalize and regulate, which is where I want it to be, we're still going to have a fight ahead of us of like, do these laws make sense? Are they optimal for the culture we're collectively designing? Or do we need to design our own alternate cultures? Perhaps that's the solution. I don't know.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the Bucky Fuller thing. Make an attractive thing and entice people as opposed to fighting the other existing thing. We see a lot of that fighting. And it's like, it's fine. But is it really the best use of your time? A lot of good questions there.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm smoked.
Yeah, we're about an hour, so we should be wrapping.
So, again, January 6th, next round of Navigating Psychedelics. You've got some time to sign up for that. Please join us. We'd love to have you. And again, it's at 9 weeks this time. So we added a week because we had to add more material. Really wanted to cover a few things that we weren't covering. What was it, like research and like history?
Yeah, adding more of the research and history into it. We cover it, but I thought, we could go a little bit more in depth there.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's important. So again, CE approved. It's a great way to get a foundation for your psychedelic career, if that's what you're doing, or just to have an understanding of the space and to see, do you want to be in here, for 5 years, 20 years, 30? Get a look at what's going on. We talk about some controversies that we don't really talk about in the podcast. We talk about a lot, actually. So you get a real global view in there. And transpersonally informed. But Kyle's got this whole somatic background, so there's a lot of really good value there around somatic psychology.
And to just better serve your clients, right? If you want to learn how to, have conversations around this with clients are coming in to talk about it. How do you approach it? Also want to develop some psychedelic literacy as well. So you can, start to move into this space more and, just help the people that you're serving.
Just came up with a commercial. Are you a therapist? Do you freeze up when your client wants to talk to you about psychedelic drugs? Come on down to Navigating Psychedelics, where we can help you understand how to speak to your clients about this safely, not put your license at risk, and really serve your clients more appropriately than you could otherwise. Because if you're afraid to talk to your therapy client or patient, whatever, are you really doing them a service? Probably not. Are you shaming them? Oh, you did acid last weekend? What if your mother found out? Or, just crazy shit. I'm trying to put words in a fictional therapist's mouth, but we can be more skilled around this, and we can do better for our clients if we understand it better. And this is a great way to make movement there. And
that's a solid commercial, Joe. I think we need to record that a little bit more.
We got to come up with what actors we want to use. I'm busy. And then Jerry Brown, when does this kick off?
That kicks off on Tuesday, October 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And that will be a 4-week class. Again, with a lot of pre-recorded material. He's got 6 modules in there, exploring the past, present, and future. Goes over the 10 historical psychedelic landmarks, talking about careers, the resurgence of psychedelic research. So he goes all over the board with the past, present, and future. So if you want a nice foundation in psychedelic history, and then also helping to navigate your way through the emerging field, will be an awesome course. And Jerry's just wealth of knowledge. I mean, he's been teaching about psychedelics, I think from 1975, he said from Tom Roberts, I guess, right? Tom Roberts.
He's a pretty cool guy, Tom Roberts. He's the OG professor, right, in the northern Midwest.
So he mentioned that Jerry's class was probably one of the first psychedelic classes. It
was the first ever university listed course on psychedelics, I believe. That's pretty awesome. So he's been around for a long time, interested for a long time, clever guy. You can catch, if you're interested in who Jerry Brown is, check some of the podcasts out. We've done, I think, 2 or 3 with him, and he's been on others as well. So you can get a feel for him. I'm sure he's got some YouTubes out there as well. Likes to be really systematic. So it was a little bit of work getting it done, but I think the result is pretty cool. And it's CE approved as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you can get history plus CEs. For therapists, psychologists, nurses is it from Spiritual Competency Academy again?
The Spiritual Competency Academy. Yeah.
Right. So approved by the APA, so you can get those credits. So check with your board if you want them. But we've got some info on the sales pages if you need to learn more. And if you want to ask us questions, hit us up, support@psychedelicstoday.com. Regularly doing information sessions, so stay tuned. All right. Cool. Kyle, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, so Joe and Kyle signing off for Psychedelics today. We'll see you all next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.